Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday to you all. I'm so glad that you've gotten up so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to join us for daily devotions through Redeeming Life Fellowship. And today, believe it or not, is the last day of our book, our survey through the book of Romans. So we'll be focusing on chapter 13. And chapter 13 is really, really interesting, especially in light of what we've read throughout the whole book, because let me explain it this way. When the author of Hebrews is writing and explaining things in expansive, beautiful, ornate detail, that he talks about the supremacy of Christ in such an elaborate fashion. And he's gone through and talked about how we're supposed to live lives by faith that reflects the life and the character of the people, the heroes of faith, the hall of faith, as described in Hebrews 11, and then to not despise the hardship that we endure by walking through faith, because God is disciplining us. He's chastising us. He's bringing out the very best in us so that we can live fruitful lives, lasting lives, that we can become mature and not lacking anything, which actually is going on ahead into James. That's one area where James and Hebrews overlap, but I digress. But by the time that we get here to chapter 13, one of the things that you'll notice is that whether it's by a lack of space to write or lack of time to write it, that the author of Hebrews, it's like he's cramming as many short thoughts as he wants to get in that are not expansive, but it's like he's sitting down and thinking, I've said all this about the supremacy of Christ and how they should hold on to Christ, how they should endure and persevere in their faith, and this is how you live it out. And there's so much that I want to say to them, but I only have so much space, I only have so much time, I've got to start writing it all down. And so that there's, you might say, like a sense of urgency to try and get out as many nuggets of instruction and wisdom as he wants to pass down to his audience, to the people he's trying to pastor, and getting it to them because it's so important. And so what you'll find throughout chapter 13 are lots of these short little instructions, but last words, because it's like there's a sense of urgency that's pushing him down to it, to say, I have to get this out before the letter is finished. I have to get it down. This is something that they need to know. And so as you're reading through, I would encourage you, just because these instructions are so short, just because they are not as elaborate or expansive as he spent so much time previously, hold on to them. Even give chapter 13 a read through once, a read through twice, even a slow reading. Also to encourage you, I haven't encouraged you to do so as often in the past as I probably should have, but to also read it out loud so that you're hearing what it is that you're saying. That's a good way to retain and absorb and digest the message slowly, so that you're hearing well what the author is trying to say. So one of the things that we're going to do today is read through Hebrews chapter 13 and focus on primarily on the verse 7, Hebrews 13:7. That's going to be a focus, but let's read together at least verses 1 through 7 and hear what it is in rapid fire succession, these things that the author of Hebrews needs to get out and needs to get to the ears of his listeners. And so let's sit down and read together. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 1. And it says this: keep on loving each other as brothers. Already a good encouragement. Keep on loving each other as brothers. At the very least is important, because what's implied in referring to this encouragement to keep loving each other as brothers is that by virtue of being a family of God, as brothers, that there's, how should we say this? A responsibility towards each other that we encourage and love and support one another in faith, that has a way of strengthening, bringing about mutual encouragement, mutual strength, that everyone together, if they're loving each other as brothers, is going to be stronger, much stronger than any one of them would ever be alone. So we should do, as the author of Hebrews says for us to do, to keep on loving each other as brothers. But verse 2, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those in prison, as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. So a Christ-like empathy towards those who are suffering and those who are in prison. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. Keep your lives free from the love of money. Wow, that's a tough one, isn't it? Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. I encourage you to reflect on the antithesis, in other words, the disparate thought, how it is that the love of money and is so diametrically opposite to finding your contentment in God, who will never leave you and who will never forsake you. So we say with confidence, verse 6, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Now, here's a verse that I want us to meditate on as we are closing. It says this, remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. One of the things I think that's important, or for us to remember, is that you and I are always going to be following somebody. Whether that's somebody at church, somebody at work, we all have somebody who it is that we're following in their footsteps. We're looking at their lives, their patterns of life, and we're imitating. We're doing as they do. And the thing about that is that oftentimes we don't realize that that's what we're doing until we've noticed the outcome of their life and our lives. Like, that we haven't realized that these were the people who we're following until we start catching ourselves, maybe mimicking their traits and their mannerisms and their patterns of behavior and their attitudes and their disposition on life. And that by the time we start mimicking those things and we start reaping the same results as their lives are bringing, that we realized, oh my goodness, I've been following this person and I didn't realize it until now. But he says, yes, remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Let me read that again. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. That verse is certainly a challenge to me, and I hope it's a challenge to you, Luke, Bryce, Faith, Glenn, Brianna, Beth Ann, whoever's watching this, David, because what the author of Hebrews is wanting us to get at is not just simply to remember our leaders and not just simply to follow them, but to consider the outcome of their way of life. So in other words, when you see a leader and you're following that leader, you're not just considering what it is that they're doing, whether you find it pleasing, acceptable, desirable, fun, attractive, persuasive. Those sorts of things can be, they change, they adapt. They may be here one day, gone the next, that sort of thing. But what the author is wanting us to draw attention to is not simply their way of life, but to evaluate their way of life by way of the outcome of it. To say, here's the outcome of this person's life. This is what this person produces. I can see that there's a desirable outcome that their life produces, to say, I can trust what it is that they're doing and imitating their life of faith because I can see that it produces tangible results that are wholesome, that are full of life, that are life-giving, that are peaceful, that are beneficial to other people around them, who radiate the glory and the goodness of God. When I can see that that's the outcome of their way of life, then I can see that their way of life is worthy of something that's imitating. And it reminds me of this story. I'll have to probably save the story for another time. So I'm going to leave you on the edge of your seats. So yes, it's a story about a life worth imitating. And so one of these days I'll share that story with you. But tonight is not the night. But I challenge you to consider not simply who it is that you're following, but think about who it is that you're following. Consider the outcome of their way of life, how they go about their day, and what's the outcome. What's the fruit? And what that also means is that you have to be around them long enough to be able to see in what ways is their lives producing or not producing any kind of lasting fruit. And I pray that this is also the way that you think about and consider and even challenge and encourage Jesse and myself and whoever is in leadership at Redeeming Life Fellowship, that you don't just consider what we're doing, but also consider what's the outcome of our way of life. Is it Christ-like? Are we reflecting the life and the love of God? Are we practicing the sort of things that we preach? And granted, neither Jesse nor myself are perfect in our practice, but we know that if there's anything that's valuable in any way that we lead this church, it's because it's the fruit of us learning and trying and even failing miserably at learning how to imitate Christ, so that as a church we do become a people who are Christ followers. In other words, we're Christ imitators, that we become people who are fruitful and mature disciples of Christ because we learn to live like Christ lived and to learn to love like Christ loved. So I pray, go with God today. Thank you so much for taking time to enjoy daily devotions with us. Please click subscribe so that you get daily notifications to follow along with the Revive School reading plan. And I pray God would use you to be a person whose life and their patterns are worthy of imitation as we consider the outcome of the lives that we live. So God bless you, keep you, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.